Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we start today's case, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe to support us, click the like button, and let's get into the case. The Antarctic wind howled across the vast expanse of ice, carrying with it the scent of salt and the distant calls of seabirds. Ethan Reeves adjusted the collar of his heavy-duty parka as he stared out across the frigid waters of the Weddell Sea. At 29, he was already making a name for himself in wildlife documentary filmmaking, but this expedition to Antarctica promised to be the project that would truly establish his reputation. 3 weeks into the 2-month expedition, and they had already captured footage that would make network executives salivate. Emperor penguins diving gracefully through ice holes, a minke whale breaching against a backdrop of towering glaciers, and leopard seals hunting in packs along the ice edge. Today's objective was ambitious: document leopard seals hunting, with hopes of capturing the rarely filmed interaction between these predators and the orcas that sometimes stole their kills. It was a phenomenon that had been mentioned in scientific literature, but rarely captured on film in its entirety. Ethan had pitched this sequence as the centerpiece of his documentary, Predators of the Antarctic, and the team had spent days tracking leopard seal movements to predict the best filming location. Weather report says we've got a 4-hour window before that storm system moves in, called Dr. Marina Chen, the marine biologist who served as the expedition's scientific advisor. At 34, she had already published groundbreaking research on cetacean hunting patterns in polar regions, making her the perfect consultant for Ethan's project. Marina's breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as she studied the satellite weather map on her tablet. Her experience in Antarctic conditions had proven invaluable throughout the expedition, helping them navigate the unpredictable weather patterns that could transform a calm filming day into a life-threatening situation within hours. 4 hours should be enough, Ethan replied, checking his camera equipment one final time. The seal colony is active this morning, and if we're lucky, the orcas will make an appearance. He tapped the waterproof housing of his primary camera. I've been waiting my entire career for this shot. Their research vessel, the Aurora, was anchored a mile offshore, serving as their base of operations. For close-up filming, they relied on 2 Zodiac inflatable boats, reinforced for Antarctic conditions and equipped with specialized camera mounts. The Zodiacs allowed them the maneuverability to follow marine life and position themselves for optimal filming angles without disturbing natural behaviors. Just remember the protocols, Marina cautioned, her expression serious beneath her knitted hat. These aren't the friendly Shamu-type orcas people think of. Antarctic orcas are apex predators with complex hunting strategies. We keep a minimum distance of 100 meters, more if they show any signs of interest in the boats. Ethan nodded, having heard the warning before but appreciating the reminder. Unlike many filmmakers who sought increasingly dangerous proximity to wildlife for dramatic footage, he prided himself on ethical filming practices that prioritized both crew safety and minimal disruption to animal behavior. Still, the competitive pressure of wildlife filmmaking had been pushing him to take calculated risks for exceptional footage. Team briefing in 10 minutes, called Lars Johansson, their expedition leader and Zodiac pilot. The 52-year-old Norwegian had 20 years of polar expedition experience, his weathered face testament to countless hours spent in the harshest environments on Earth. We'll review safety protocols before launch. The 5-person filming team gathered in the Aurora's main cabin, where the relative warmth fogged up their glasses as they entered from the deck. Besides Ethan, Marina, and Lars, the team included Sophia Williams, the 27-year-old sound engineer responsible for capturing the subtle acoustics of marine life, and James Chen, Marina's research assistant and the team's secondary camera operator. Lars unfolded a map of the area on the central table. We'll take both Zodiacs today. I'll pilot the primary filming boat with Ethan and Sophia. Marina and James will take the second boat to collect additional footage and scientific data. His finger traced their planned route. We'll maintain radio. Contact at all times. Remember, safety comes first. If I give the order to retreat, there's no discussion. Everyone nodded in agreement. They had worked together long enough to respect the chain of command in potentially dangerous situations. The leopard seals have been hunting near this ice shelf, Marina explained, pointing to a location marked on the map. Based on previous patterns, they'll likely be active for several hours after sunrise. If orcas are in the area, they'll be drawn to the seal activity. Ethan felt the familiar surge of anticipation that preceded potentially groundbreaking footage. Let's get moving. The light will be perfect in about 40 minutes. They launched the Zodiacs into the steel-grey waters 20 minutes later, each team member bundled in multiple layers beneath their waterproof gear. Despite the thermal protection, the biting cold found ways to seep in around wrists and ankles, a constant reminder of the unforgiving environment they worked in. Ethan sat at the bow of the lead Zodiac, his main camera already mounted and running. He had learned early in his career to start filming well before the expected action. Some of his most celebrated footage had been captured during what should have been mundane transit time. The second camera, a smaller unit designed for flexibility, hung around his neck, protected by a weatherproof cover, but ready for immediate use. The Zodiacs moved slowly through the water, their engines maintained at minimal speed to reduce noise pollution. As they approached the area where the leopard seals had been active, Lars cut the engine entirely, allowing them to drift the final distance. "There," Marina whispered over the radio from the second boat, now positioned about 50 meters to their east. Two leopard seals at the ice edge looking for penguins. Ethan trained his camera on the sleek, spotted predators. Leopard seals were impressive hunters, their powerful jaws capable of catching penguins mid-swim. At up to 12 feet long and weighing over 1,000 pounds, they were the Antarctic's equivalent of lions, apex predators that inspired both awe and fear. For the next hour, they filmed the seals patrolling the ice edge, occasionally lunging into the water with explosive speed to chase their prey. Ethan captured several successful hunts, the seals' efficient killing method both brutal and fascinating. They would catch penguins underwater, then bring them to the surface to violently fling them side to side, tearing the birds apart before consuming them. "This is already excellent footage," Sophia murmured as she adjusted her directional microphone to capture the sounds of the hunt. "The network will be thrilled even if we don't see orcas today." Ethan nodded but kept his focus on the viewfinder. "Stay ready, I have a feeling about today." His intuition proved correct 20 minutes later when Marina's voice crackled urgently over the radio. "Orcas approaching from the south, part of at least 5 individuals." Ethan's heart rate spiked. He swung his camera toward the indicated direction, scanning the horizon. At first he saw nothing but the endless meeting of grey water and greyer sky. Then he spotted them, the distinctive black dorsal fins slicing through the water's surface, moving with deliberate purpose toward the hunting grounds of the leopard seals. "Maintain distance," Lars reminded them, starting the Zodiac's engine at its lowest setting to reposition for a better angle. "Remember, these Type B orcas grow to 26 feet. They're specialized seal hunters." Ethan barely heard him, already lost in the filmmaker's trance that overtook him when extraordinary footage was unfolding. Through his viewfinder, he tracked the approaching orcas, noting their coordinated movement. Unlike the random patterns of many marine mammals, these orcas moved with clear intent, their formation suggesting communication and strategy. "They're hunting as a unit," Marina observed over the radio, her scientific excitement evident. "Classic Type B behavior. Watch how they're spreading out to cover the escape routes from the ice edge." The leopard seals had noticed the approaching threat. One immediately abandoned its hunting and slipped into the water, diving deep to escape. The second seal, however, had just captured a penguin and was in the process of consuming its prey on the ice edge. "They're going to try for that one," Marina predicted. "It's distracted by its kill." What happened next occurred with such stunning coordination that even the experienced team watched in awe. 3 orcas created a large wave by swimming in unison directly toward the ice flow, while 2 others positioned themselves to block potential escape routes. The wave washed over the edge of the ice, nearly dislodging the feeding leopard seal. The seal abandoned its meal and slid into the water, exactly as the orcas had intended. "They're using displacement waves," Marina narrated for the benefit of the footage. "It's a hunting technique documented primarily in Antarctic orcas. The underwater battle was invisible to the human observers, but the violent churning of water told its own story. Less than a minute later, the water calmed and the orcas resurfaced. One carried the now lifeless leopard seal in its jaws." "Incredible," Ethan breathed, making sure his camera captured every detail as the orcas began to share their massive prey, tearing it apart. With methodical efficiency. "We just documented a perfect hunting sequence." So focused was the team on filming the feeding orcas that they initially missed the subtle change in the pod's behavior. It was Marina who first noticed. "Lars, I don't like how that large female keeps looking in our direction," she said over the radio, her voice carrying a new edge of concern. "Let's increase our distance." Lars nodded and nudged the Zodiac's throttle, slowly backing them away from the scene. The second boat, piloted by James, followed suit. But the orcas had indeed taken notice of the human observers. 3 continued to feed on the leopard seal carcass, but 2, including the large female that Marina had identified, had broken away from the group and were now moving in the direction of the boats. "They're just curious," Ethan said, still filming. "This could be amazing footage of investigative behavior." "No," Marina replied firmly. "This isn't curiosity. They're assessing us. Lars, I recommend we retreat to the Aurora immediately." Lars needed no further convincing. "Full retreat, both boats now." He pushed the throttle forward, turning the Zodiac toward their research vessel. The engine's roar shattered the relative quiet, but Ethan kept filming over his shoulder, unwilling to miss the continuing behavior of the approaching orcas. What he captured next would later be studied by marine biologists worldwide. The 2 investigating orcas, upon seeing the boats begin to retreat, immediately changed their swimming pattern. Instead of the direct approach they had been making, they dove simultaneously, disappearing from view. "They've gone under," Ethan reported, scanning the water's surface for any sign of the massive predators. "Keep moving," Lars ordered, pushing the Zodiac to its maximum safe speed. "And watch for approaching dorsal fins." James had the second Zodiac running at full throttle as well, taking a slightly different return route toward the Aurora. For a moment, it seemed they might make it back without incident. The research vessel was visible in the distance, less than half a mile away. Then Marina's voice came across the radio, tense and urgent. "They're surfacing near us, multiple animals." Ethan swiveled to look at the second Zodiac. To his horror, he saw the water around the smaller boat churning as 3 orcas, not just the 2 that had initially approached, surfaced in close proximity. They weren't attacking, not yet, but their synchronized surfacing on 3 sides of the boat couldn't be coincidence. "They're herding them," Lars muttered, recognizing the hunting technique from years of observation. "Just like they did with the seal." Before anyone could respond, a 4th orca surfaced directly in front of the second Zodiac. James swerved sharply to avoid collision, causing the boat to bounce roughly over its own wake. For a heart-stopping moment, it appeared the Zodiac might capsize. James managed to stabilize it, but the sudden maneuver had brought them dangerously, close to one of the circling orcas. "We need to help them," Ethan urged, but Lars shook his head grimly. "We can't risk both boats. The Aurora is deploying the rescue dinghy with the emergency deterrents." He keyed his radio. "James, Marina, hold course for the Aurora. Don't stop or change direction unless absolutely necessary to avoid collision." The second Zodiac continued its desperate journey toward the research vessel, the orcas maintaining their positions around it, like border collies herding sheep. Then, with a synchronicity that demonstrated their intelligence and coordination, all 4 orcas dove simultaneously. "Brace yourselves," Lars shouted over the radio, recognizing what was coming. Seconds later, the orcas resurfaced in perfect formation, creating a massive displacement wave that rocked the Zodiac violently. The boat tilted precariously, nearly vertical for a terrifying moment. Both James and Marina clung to the sides, but the force was too great. The Zodiac capsized, throwing both researchers into the frigid Antarctic waters. "Man overboard!" Lars shouted into his radio, already changing course to intercept. "Aurora, We have 2 researchers in the water with active orcas in pursuit. Ethan's filmmaker instincts warred with his human concern. He kept his camera running even as panic rose in his throat, documenting what was quickly becoming a life-or-death situation. Through his viewfinder, he saw Marina surface first, gasping in the shock of the freezing water. Her survival training kicked in immediately as she pulled the emergency inflation tab on her specialized polar immersion suit. The built-in flotation deployed, helping to keep her head above water. James surfaced several meters away, also activating his emergency flotation. Both wore the full immersion suits that were mandatory for Antarctic fieldwork, offering temporary protection against the killing cold of the Southern Ocean. But even with the suits, hypothermia would begin within minutes, and the suits did nothing to protect against the more immediate threat circling beneath them. "The acoustics," Sophia gasped beside Ethan. As the team's sound engineer, she had been monitoring the underwater microphone trailing behind their Zodiac. "They're vocalizing intensely. The whole pod is communicating." The capsized Zodiac drifted upside down, its specialized pontoons keeping it afloat despite the inversion. James began swimming toward it, calling for Marina to do the same. The overturned boat would provide some protection and a place to climb partially out of the water. "We're coming," Lars called over the portable loudspeaker mounted on their Zodiac. "Hold on to the capsized boat." They were still more than 100 meters away when the first direct interaction occurred. The large female orca surfaced less than 2 meters from Marina, close enough that the displaced water pushed her backward. Marina froze facing the massive predator. The orca opened its mouth, displaying rows of conical teeth designed for gripping prey. "Don't move," Lars instructed over the loudspeaker, though Marina clearly understood the protocol for cetacean encounters. Any sudden movement could trigger a predatory response. The orca submerged again, circling beneath Marina. On the capsized Zodiac, James had managed to pull himself partially onto the exposed bottom of the boat. He extended an arm toward Marina, now less than 10 meters from relative safety. "Swim, slowly," he called to her. Marina began moving cautiously toward the overturned Zodiac, keeping her movement smooth and deliberate, despite the adrenaline undoubtedly surging through her system. She made it halfway to James when the water around her erupted. The orca surfaced directly beneath her, its rostrum lifting her partially out of the water. Marina tumbled back into the sea as the orca slid past, a behavior known as spy hopping, typically used by orcas to observe prey on ice floes. But this was different, more aggressive. The orca was testing her, determining if she was viable prey. Lars pushed their Zodiac to its limit, closing the gap to the stranded researchers. They were now within 50 meters, close enough that Ethan could clearly see the terror on Marina's face through his telephoto lens. The research vessel Aurora was also approaching from the opposite direction, but was still too distant to provide immediate assistance. What happened next occurred with such shocking speed that even Ethan's professional reflexes barely captured it on film. The large female orca disappeared beneath the surface, then reappeared in a vertical lunge directly beside Marina. Its massive jaws clamped onto her leg, the pressure evident even through the protective immersion suit. Marina's scream cut through the Antarctic air as the orca began to pull her under. Her survival training and instincts converged in a desperate reaction. She pounded at the sensitive area near the orca's eye, the only defense technique known to occasionally deter cetacean attacks. Whether from Marina's defensive strikes or its own decision process, the orca released her after several seconds. Marina immediately began a frantic swim toward the capsized Zodiac, leaving a trail of blood in the frigid water. "Hurry!" James shouted, reaching as far as he could without losing his precarious position on the overturned boat. Their Zodiac arrived seconds later, positioning itself between the injured Marina and the circling orcas. Lars cut the engine to avoid propeller injuries as Ethan and Sophia reached over the side, grasping Marina's outstretched arms. "Pull her in, carefully," Lars instructed, keeping watch on the orcas that continued to circle at a distance of about 20 meters. They managed to haul Marina into the boat, her immersion suit torn and bloodied below the knee. Sophia immediately began first aid, using the emergency medical kit stowed in every expedition vessel. The suit had prevented some damage, but the Orca's teeth had penetrated both the material and Marina's flesh, leaving deep puncture wounds that bled heavily. "James next," Lars directed, maneuvering the Zodiac toward the capsized boat where the research assistant clung to the slippery surface. As they approached, Ethan noticed a change in the Orca's behavior. Rather than continuing their circular pattern, 3 of them had lined up side by side about 50 meters away. "They're going to rush the boat," Marina gasped through pain-clenched teeth. "Wave pattern attack. Get James now." Lars recognized the formation as well. He pushed the throttle forward, bringing their Zodiac alongside the capsized one in seconds. Ethan and Sophia reached for James, who half jumped, half fell into their boat. The moment he was aboard, Lars gunned the engine, putting distance between them and the synchronized Orcas. The wave hit seconds later, rocking their Zodiac violently, but not enough to capsize it. Through the spray, Ethan could see the Aurora approaching rapidly, its bulk offering safety from further Orca attacks. "They're still coming," Sophia warned, pointing to the dorsal fins now cutting through the water directly behind them. Lars pushed the Zodiac beyond its recommended speed, bouncing roughly over the choppy waves. The distance to the Aurora closed, agonizingly slowly, each second stretching as the pursuing Orcas drew nearer. "They're going to catch us before we reach the ship," James said, his voice tight with fear. Ethan made a split-second decision. Reaching into the emergency gear stowed beneath his seat, he pulled out an acoustic deterrent device, a specialized underwater speaker, designed to emit sounds that would discourage approaching marine mammals without causing them harm. Such devices were controversial among conservationists and typically used only in life-threatening situations, which this had certainly become. "Do it," Lars nodded, reading Ethan's intention. Ethan activated the device and dropped it overboard, trailing on its cord behind the speeding Zodiac. The deterrent was programmed with a sequence of Orca alarm calls and artificial sounds known to discourage approach. For several heart-stopping seconds, it seemed to have no effect. The pursuing Orcas maintained their course, now less than 20 meters behind the Zodiac. Then gradually they began to fall back, not retreating entirely, but no longer actively pursuing. "It's working," Sophia breathed, her hands still applying pressure to Marina's wounded leg. The Aurora was now less than 100 meters away. On its deck, crew members prepared to assist, medical supplies at the ready. The ship's own acoustic deterrents had been deployed, creating an underwater perimeter that the intelligent predators seemed reluctant to cross. "Almost there," Lars encouraged, glancing back at Marina, whose face had grown alarmingly pale. Blood had soaked through the pressure bandages, indicating arterial damage that required immediate professional attention. The final approach to the Aurora seemed to take an eternity, though in reality it was less than a minute. As they came alongside, crew members reached down to help transfer Marina first, carefully lifting her onto the ship's deck where the expedition doctor waited. Once all 4 were safely aboard, Lars directed 2 crew members to retrieve the capsized Zodiac. The Orcas had maintained their distance but remained visible, their dorsal fins cutting through the water in a wide perimeter around the research vessel. "We need to get Marina to the Chilean research station," the doctor announced after examining her wounds. "She needs surgical facilities beyond what we have here. The arterial damage is significant." The Aurora's captain was already plotting the fastest course to the nearest research station, with medical facilities located on King George Island. Even pushing the vessel to its maximum speed, they were looking at a journey of several hours. In the ship's medical bay, Marina lay conscious but in shock, her body temperature dangerously low from the combined effects of immersion in Antarctic waters and blood loss. The doctor had started an IV and administered pain medication while preparing for emergency transport. "The Orcas," she murmured as Ethan entered the medical bay. "Did you get the footage?" Despite everything, Ethan smiled at her scientist's dedication. "Every second," he confirmed. "Rest now, we're getting you to proper medical care." James had escaped with minor hypothermia and no injuries, already warming up with hot beverages in the ship's galley. But the close call had shaken everyone on board. What had begun as a routine filming expedition had transformed into a stark reminder of their vulnerability in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. As the Aurora began its emergency journey to King George Island, Ethan reviewed the footage he had captured. From a purely professional standpoint, it was extraordinary, perhaps the most comprehensive documentation of intentional Orca aggression toward humans ever recorded. But the ethical implications weighed heavily on him. This wasn't just dramatic footage for ratings. It was a serious incident that had nearly cost lives. On the bridge, the captain maintained communication with the Chilean station, arranging for emergency medical transport. The Aurora would rendezvous with a medical evacuation helicopter at the earliest possible point, transferring Marina for immediate surgery. "How is she?" Lars asked when Ethan returned to the bridge. "Stable, but the doctor is concerned about the arterial damage and potential infection," Ethan replied. "The immersion suit prevented some injury, but those teeth went deep." Lars nodded grimly. "I've seen orcas take down whales 10 times their size. We're lucky it was just testing her rather than committing to a predatory attack." "Was it testing, though?" Ethan asked, the question that had been bothering him since they'd pulled Marina from the water. Their coordination was too perfect. The wave to capsize the boat, the synchronized movements. It felt deliberate. Lars considered this, his weathered face serious. Orcas are apex predators with problem-solving intelligence comparable to great apes. They are known to develop specialized hunting techniques and pass them between generations. He paused. But predation on humans is virtually unheard of. There are no verified fatal attacks in the wild. "Until potentially today," Ethan said quietly. "Let's hope not," Lars replied. "Right now we focus on getting Marina proper medical care. The scientific implications can wait." The implications, however, continued to occupy Ethan's thoughts as he sat beside Marina's bed in the medical bay. The biologist drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain medication keeping her comfortable but disoriented. "The female," she murmured during one lucid moment, grasping Ethan's arm with surprising strength. "She had a notched dorsal fin. Document it." Ethan nodded, making a mental note to review his footage for this identifying feature. Individual orcas could be identified by their unique dorsal fin shapes and pigmentation patterns, allowing researchers to track them over time. "I will," he promised. "Rest now." 4 hours into their emergency journey, the Aurora established radio contact with a Chilean naval vessel equipped with medical evacuation capabilities. The rendezvous would occur within the hour, cutting precious time off Marina's wait for surgical intervention. The doctor's concern had grown as Marina's condition deteriorated. Despite pressure bandages and elevation, the bleeding had continued intermittently, and signs of infection had begun to appear despite prophylactic antibiotics. The cold water may have slowed the bleeding initially, the doctor explained to Ethan and Lars, but it also introduced countless microorganisms into the wound. Orca mouths, like most marine predators, harbor bacteria that can cause serious infection in humans. The transfer to the Chilean vessel occurred in marginally calmer waters, though still challenging by normal maritime standards. A medical team boarded the Aurora, stabilized Marina for transport, then carefully transferred her to their ship, which carried a more advanced medical facility and could travel at higher speeds than the research vessel. "We'll meet you at the key research station," Ethan called as they carried Marina away. Whether she heard or understood was unclear, her consciousness now affected by stronger pain medication administered by the Chilean medical team. With Marina on her way to proper medical care, the atmosphere on the Aurora shifted from crisis management to somber reflection. The remaining team gathered in the ship's conference room to debrief the incident, a standard protocol after any safety event. "I want each of you to describe what you observed in sequence," said Captain Hernandez, who would be responsible for the official incident report, starting with the initial sighting of the orcas. One by one, they recounted the events, from the successful filming of the leopard seal hunt through the orcas' coordinated attack on the Zodiac and the desperate rescue. Ethan's footage played on the main screen, providing visual confirmation of their accounts. When they reached the footage of the actual attack on Marina, Sophia turned away, unable to watch. James, still pallid from his own ordeal in the frigid water, stared fixedly at the screen, perhaps attempting to process the trauma through objective observation. "The behavior is unprecedented," noted Dr. Thomas Ritter, the expedition's secondary marine biologist. "Orcas investigate objects and occasionally show aggressive behavior toward boats, but coordinated capsizing followed by an attack on a human—" He shook his head. "It contradicts everything we understand about wild orca behavior toward humans." "Could it have been mistaken identity?" suggested one of the crew members. "Perhaps they identified the immersion suit as a seal." Dr. Ritter considered this. "Possible, but unlikely. Orcas have excellent vision and use echolocation to identify prey. They would have recognized that Marina wasn't their typical food source, unless," Ethan interjected, a disturbing thought forming, "they were deliberately experimenting with a new food source or testing a new hunting technique." The room fell silent as they considered this possibility. "Orcas are known for cultural transmission of hunting techniques," Dr. Ritter acknowledged reluctantly. "Pods develop specialized strategies for hunting particular prey, which are then taught to younger members, but there's no precedent for them adding humans to their prey selection." "There's a first time for everything," Lars said grimly, "and we may have just witnessed it." Captain Hernandez cleared his throat. "Speculation aside, our immediate concern is completing the incident report and determining whether this area should be flagged for heightened orca aggression warnings." He turned to Ethan. "Your footage will be essential for marine mammal researchers. To analyze this behavior, are you willing to share it?" Ethan nodded without hesitation. Of course, scientific understanding takes priority over exclusive broadcast rights. The documentary filmmaker in him recognized the professional value of the footage, but the human being understood that safety concerns outweighed commercial interests. "Good," the captain replied. "Now we continue to King George Island to monitor Marina's condition and determine how this affects the remainder of the expedition. The originally planned 2-month expedition would clearly need re-evaluation. With one team member seriously injured and equipment lost in the capsizing, continuing as planned seemed unfeasible. Yet Ethan felt oddly reluctant to abandon the project entirely. They had already captured groundbreaking footage, including the very event they had hoped to document: orcas interacting with leopard seals, albeit with an unexpected and traumatic twist. The Aurora reached King George Island 18 hours after the attack. The Chilean research station's medical facility, while not comparable to a major hospital, was equipped for emergency surgery and critical care in this remote location. Marina had undergone immediate surgery upon arrival and was now in recovery, the station's doctor informed them as they disembarked. "She was fortunate," Dr. Vega explained as she led Ethan and Lars to the recovery room. "The arterial damage was repairable, and we've addressed the infection risk aggressively. However, she'll need evacuation to a mainland hospital within the next 48 hours for follow-up care and to begin physical therapy. There was significant muscle and nerve damage." Marina lay pale against white sheets, an IV delivering antibiotics and fluids. Her left leg was heavily bandaged and elevated, with drainage tubes visible. She managed a weak smile as they entered. "Did we get the footage?" she asked, her voice hoarse but determined. "We did," Ethan confirmed, moved by her continued commitment to the scientific documentation despite her ordeal. "Crystal clear, the entire hunting sequence, from the leopard seal to—" He hesitated. "To everything that followed." "Good," she whispered. "It matters. They displayed problem-solving intelligence and coordinated hunting strategies directed at novel prey. It's scientifically significant, even if I was the experimental subject." Her attempt at scientific detachment was betrayed by the slight tremor in her voice. "You don't need to think about that now," Lars said gently. "Focus on recovery. The Chilean authorities are arranging medical evacuation to Punta Arenas tomorrow morning." Marina nodded, clearly fatigued by even this brief conversation. The footage needs to be analyzed by cetacean behavior specialists, she insisted. Promise me. I promise, Ethan assured her. Now rest. Outside the recovery room, Dr. Vega provided more details on Marina's condition. Physically, with proper rehabilitation, she should regain approximately 80–90% function in the affected leg. The psychological impact, however, the doctor shrugged. That's harder to quantify. Being the target of a predator attack often results in post-traumatic stress. She's a scientist, Lars said. She'll process it analytically. Dr. Vega gave him a knowing look. The human brain doesn't always allow for such compartmentalization, no matter how logical we believe ourselves to be. I've recommended psychological follow-up along with her physical rehabilitation. While Marina recovered, Ethan and the team established temporary quarters at the research station. The Chilean scientists were professionally curious about the attack, reviewing Ethan's footage with the keen interest of researchers presented with novel data. The coordination is remarkable, noted Dr. Elena Fuentes, the station's marine mammal specialist. Look at how they position themselves before creating the wave. It's clearly an adaptation of techniques used to wash seals off ice floes. But applied to a boat, Ethan observed. Precisely. Orcas have been documented bumping and occasionally tipping ice floes to access prey, but deliberately capsizing a boat suggests a conceptual leap, recognizing that the same technique could work on a different floating object. The analysis continued over the next day, with the footage being transmitted to cetacean research centers in Argentina, the United States and Norway. The incident quickly generated intense scientific interest, both for its rarity and its implications for understanding orca cognition and behavior. Marina was evacuated to Punta Arenas the following day, accompanied by James, who would continue with her to the United States once she was stable enough for the longer journey. She had insisted that Ethan and the others remain to continue the documentary work, though in modified form and with enhanced safety protocols. The work is too important to abandon, she'd told Ethan before departure. Just stay out of the water and keep the deterrents active. With the expedition's lead scientist evacuated, Captain Hernandez had technically received authorization to terminate the research mission. However, after consultation with the sponsoring network and scientific advisors, a compromise was reached. The Aurora would continue operations for 2 more weeks, focusing on less dangerous filming opportunities, primarily shore-based work, documenting penguin colonies and longer-range cetacean observation from the main vessel rather than Zodiacs. Ethan found himself conflicted. Professionally, the footage they had already obtained was extraordinary, virtually guaranteeing the documentary's success. The attack sequence, while ethically complex to include, captured a previously undocumented behavior that would fascinate audiences and researchers alike. Yet personally, he felt a growing unease about continuing the project that had nearly cost his colleague her life. 5 days after the attack, the Aurora departed King George Island to resume limited operations. The atmosphere on board had changed, perceptibly. Where previously there had been excited chatter about filming opportunities and wildlife sightings, now conversations were muted, safety procedures reinforced, and watches posted even when the ship was stationary. Their first filming location was a Gen 2 penguin colony on the Antarctic Peninsula, safely observable from shore without water exposure. As Ethan set up his camera equipment on the rocky beach, he found himself constantly scanning the offshore waters, alert for any sign of dorsal fins. He recognized the hypervigilance as a trauma response, but couldn't quiet the instinctive wariness. "You keep looking at the water," observed Sophia, who was setting up her sound equipment nearby. "Expecting company?" Ethan managed a tight smile. "Just being cautious." "They got under your skin," she said. "Not a question. Mine too. I keep hearing those vocalizations they made right before they capsized the Zodiac, like they were planning it." That evening, Ethan reviewed the day's footage in his cabin aboard the Aurora. The penguin sequence was technically perfect. The lighting, composition, and behavior all captured exactly as needed for the documentary. Yet he felt oddly disconnected from the work, as though going through professional motions without the passion that had previously driven him. His satellite phone rang shortly before midnight, Marina calling from her hospital bed in Punta Arenas. "How's the leg?" he asked after initial greetings. "Still attached," she replied with gallows humor. "The surgeons are cautiously optimistic. I'll walk again, though there might be a permanent limp. Small price for encountering the apex predator on its terms and surviving to take notes." Her attempt at scientific detachment sounded forced, even over the satellite connection. "Marina," Ethan began, unsure how to broach the subject. "I know," she interrupted. "I'm supposed to be processing the trauma, not intellectualizing it. The psychologist they assigned me is very insistent about that." A pause. "But understanding helps me. The preliminary analysis suggests this may be the first documented case of orcas applying a known hunting technique to human targets. We've always known they're intelligent enough to do it. They just never had reason to try. Until now, perhaps." Her voice grew more clinical, retreating into scientific analysis. "Some researchers are suggesting resource pressure might be driving behavioral adaptation. As climate change affects traditional prey availability, innovative hunting strategies become survival advantages." "That's not comforting," Ethan noted. "Science rarely optimizes for comfort," Marina replied, a phrase she had used often during their expedition when observations challenged preconceptions. "Anyway, I didn't call to discuss research implications. How are you doing, truthfully?" The question caught Ethan off guard. He had been so focused on Marina's physical recovery and the expedition's continuation that he hadn't fully examined his own psychological response to the incident. He started, then reconsidered. "I'm functioning professionally. The penguin sequence looks great, but I feel different about the work now. More cautious, less." He searched. So for the word. "Invulnerable?" Marina suggested. "Maybe," Ethan acknowledged. "For years I've worked in close proximity to predators, sharks, crocodiles, big cats, always with the professional distance of being behind the camera. Now that distance feels insufficient." "Welcome to post-predator attack consciousness," Marina said with a hint of her usual dry humor. "The world looks different from the perspective of potential prey." The conversation shifted to logistics. When Marina might return to limited duties, how the documentary's focus might evolve in response to the attack, the network's reaction to the preliminary footage. By the time they disconnected, Ethan felt both better and worse. Relieved that Marina was maintaining her intellectual engagement despite her injuries, but unsettled by her matter-of-fact acceptance of their new understanding of orca behavior. Potential. The following week passed without further orca encounters, though their absence did little to reduce the vigilance of the expedition team. They captured excellent footage of the peninsula's wildlife, from the penguin colonies to elephant seals hauled out on rocky beaches. The documentary was taking shape, albeit different from its original conception. Rather than focusing exclusively on predator-prey relationships, it now examined the broader Antarctic ecosystem, with the orca attack serving as a dramatic illustration of the environment's unforgiving nature. 9 days after resuming operations, the Aurora anchored in a sheltered bay to film craybeater seals that frequented the area. These seals, despite their name, primarily filter-fed on krill rather than crabs, using specialized teeth to strain the tiny crustaceans from the water. Ethan was setting up his camera on the ship's observation deck when Lars approached, looking concerned. "The patrol boat spotted a pod of orcas entering the bay," he said without preamble. "Type B, at least 6 individuals." Ethan's heart rate accelerated involuntarily. "Distance?" "About 2 kilometers and approaching." Lars handed him binoculars. "Dorsal fin identification is underway, but preliminary assessment suggests it's the same pod from the attack." Through the binoculars, Ethan could make out the distinctive black dorsal fins cutting through the water's surface. The orcas were moving with purpose, not the casual meandering of random travel. He scanned the lead animals, focusing on the tallest dorsal fin, the presumed matriarch of the pod. Even at this distance, he could make out the distinctive notch near the fin's tip that Marina had identified. "It's them," he confirmed, a chill running through him despite the thermal gear. Captain Hernandez had already ordered all crew inside. the vessel and activated the ship's acoustic deterrents. The Aurora itself was too large for the Orcas to threaten directly, but the psychological impact on the team was immediate and palpable. Through windows and from the bridge, every available pair of binoculars tracked the approaching predators. "They're herding the crab-eater seals," observed Dr. Ritter, who had taken over primary scientific duties in Marina's absence. Classic hunting behavior. Ethan had already mounted his primary camera with its most powerful telephoto lens, capturing the unfolding hunt from the relative safety of the ship. The Orcas demonstrated the same coordinated tactics they had documented before, surrounding the seals, cutting off escape routes, creating washing waves to dislodge animals from ice flows. For the next 40 minutes, they filmed an extraordinary predation sequence as the Orcas systematically reduced the crab-eater seal population in the bay. The efficiency was both impressive and unsettling, the intelligent predators working with a coordination that demonstrated their problem-solving capabilities. "They're approaching the ship," Sophia noted, tension evident in her voice. 3 Orcas had broken from the hunting group and were making a direct line toward the Aurora. Unlike the Zodiacs, the research vessel presented no capsizing opportunity, but their deliberate approach suggested investigative intent. "They remember us," Ethan murmured, continuing to film as the massive animals drew nearer. The lead Orca, the notched fin female, approached to within 20 meters of the Aurora's hull, close enough that Ethan could clearly see the distinctive eye patch marking that identified Type B Orcas. She spy-hopped, lifting her head vertically from the water to observe the vessel above the surface, an unmistakable investigative behavior. For several long minutes, the 3 Orcas circled the Aurora, occasionally spy-hopping or swimming directly alongside the hull. The ship's acoustic deterrents seemed to create discomfort, but not enough to drive them away entirely. The behavior wasn't overtly aggressive, but rather suggested an unsettling intelligence, assessment, recognition, perhaps even memory of the previous encounter. "They're communicating constantly," reported the acoustic specialist monitoring the ship's hydrophones. "Extensive vocalization between these 3 and the hunting group." Eventually, after what felt to the humans aboard like an intentional demonstration of their presence, the investigating Orcas rejoined the main pod. The entire group continued their hunt for another hour, before departing the bay as cohesively as they had arrived. The encounter, while lacking the drama and danger of the attack, left the expedition team profoundly unsettled. The apparent recognition, the deliberate investigation, the coordinated behavior, all reinforced the growing realization that they were dealing with predators whose intelligence had perhaps been underestimated in the context of human interactions. "They came to look at us," Sophia said later, as the team reviewed the footage in the ship's media room. "Not to hunt, not randomly. They recognized the ship and came to observe." "That's anthropomorphizing," Dr. Ritter cautioned, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by his own objection. "We can't know their motivations." "We can observe their behaviors," Ethan countered, "and their behaviors suggest recognition and intentional investigation." The implications of the encounter dominated discussion aboard the Aurora that evening. If the Orcas had indeed recognized the ship from the previous interaction, it suggested memory and communication capabilities that enhanced the already substantial concerns about their behavioral adaptation. Captain Hernandez made the decision that night. "We're terminating the expedition," he announced at the evening briefing. "The risk profile has changed significantly. We have sufficient footage for the documentary, and continued operations in this area present an unacceptable safety concern." No one objected. The Aurora set course for Ushuaia the following morning, ending the Antarctic expedition 10 days earlier than planned, but with more dramatic footage than anyone could have anticipated. During the 3-day journey to Argentina, Ethan began the preliminary organization of the documentary material. The original concept, Predators of the Antarctic, seemed both appropriate and newly loaded with unintended meaning. The centerpiece would still be the predator-prey relationships they had set out to document, but now framed within the context of adaptable hunting strategies and the rare human encounter with the ocean's apex predator. The ethical questions weighed heavily on him. Including the attack footage would undoubtedly make for compelling viewing, but he questioned whether doing so might sensationalize the incident beyond its scientific significance. Yet, excluding it would omit what might be the first documented case of orcas applying known hunting techniques to human targets, information potentially important for both research and safety. He was still wrestling with these questions when they docked in Ushuaia. Marina had been transferred to a hospital in Buenos Aires and was stable enough for visitors. Ethan flew directly there, carrying a hard drive with all the expedition footage, including both the attack and the subsequent Orca investigation of the Aurora. He found Marina sitting up in her hospital bed, her injured leg elevated and encased in a complex medical boot. Her color had improved significantly since he'd last seen her, though the physical toll of the attack remained evident in her leaner frame and the new lines around her eyes. "You brought the footage," she said after initial greetings, eyeing the hard drive he placed on her bedside table. "All of it?" "Everything," Ethan confirmed, "including their return visit." Marina's expression sharpened with professional interest. "They came back? The same pod?" "Same pod. Same notched-fin female in the lead," Ethan confirmed. They investigated the Aurora for about 20 minutes before rejoining their hunting activities. "I need to see it," Marina insisted, already reaching for the laptop beside her bed. Over the next 2 hours, they reviewed the key sequences together. The original attack footage that Marina had not yet seen in its entirety, followed by the more recent investigation behavior. Marina watched with the dual perspective of trauma, survivor and scientist, occasionally pausing the playback to note specific behaviors or patterns. "The notched fin female," she observed as they re-watched the attack sequence for the third time. "She's the one who bit me, and she led the investigation of the Aurora. That suggests individual recognition and memory, not just general awareness." "That's what we thought," Ethan agreed. "It felt personal." Marina nodded slowly. "Not in the human sense of vengeance or malice, but in the predator sense of risk assessment and opportunity. They've identified a potential new food source, tested it, and are now evaluating whether the risk-reward ratio favors continued experimentation." Put so clinically, the analysis should have been reassuring, a scientific framework rather than a nightmare scenario. Instead, Ethan found it deeply unsettling. "You're suggesting they might actively target humans going forward?" "I'm suggesting it's a possibility we can't dismiss," Marina clarified. "Orcas learn, adapt, and teach each other. If this pod determined that humans are viable prey under certain conditions, that knowledge could be culturally transmitted within the pod and potentially beyond it." The implication sat heavily between them, a new variable in the relationship between humans and one of the ocean's most intelligent predators. "What does this mean for the documentary?" Marina asked finally. Ethan had been considering this question throughout the journey north. "I'm still figuring that out. The network wants the attack included. Dramatic footage equals ratings. But there are ethical considerations, both in terms of sensationalizing the incident and in terms of how we portray the orcas." "We portray them accurately," Marina said firmly. "As apex predators with the intelligence to adapt their hunting strategies to new circumstances and opportunities. Not as villains, not as mindless killers, but as sophisticated predators doing what predators do, testing, learning, hunting." "And the attack footage?" Marina was quiet for a moment, considering. "Include it," she said finally, "with appropriate scientific context. This may be the first documented case of orcas applying known hunting techniques to human targets. That's scientifically significant, regardless of the fact that I was the target." Her voice wavered slightly on the last words, the scientist momentarily giving way to the trauma survivor. Ethan reached out, covering her hand with his own. "You don't have to be objective about this, you know. You nearly died." "I'm aware," she replied with a ghost of her dry humor. "The medical bills make that abundantly clear." More seriously, she added, "But objectivity helps me process it. Understanding the behavior, the biology behind it, that gives me a framework for what happened beyond just random tragedy." The conversation shifted to Marina's recovery plans. The surgeries had gone well, but she faced months of physical therapy to regain function in her injured leg. The psychological recovery would take its own time, though she seemed determined to approach it with the same analytical rigor she applied to her scientific work. "The nightmares are the worst," she admitted, a rare acknowledgement of the emotional impact. Not just reliving the attack, but variations, being pulled under and not released, watching the same happen to colleagues, being surrounded in open water. She shook her head. "The psychologists say it's normal trauma processing." "Is it helping? The therapy?" "Some," Marina acknowledged. "Though I suspect producing something meaningful from the experience will help more. The documentary, the research papers that will come from this, making it matter beyond just personal trauma." Ethan understood this perspective. As a documentary filmmaker, he had often observed that subjects of his films who suffered hardship found meaning through the sharing of their experiences, transforming personal difficulty into public understanding. Over the following months, as Ethan worked on shaping the documentary and Marina progressed through her recovery, they maintained regular communication. The network had enthusiastically approved the revised concept, recognizing both its dramatic potential and scientific significance. Marine biologists worldwide had reviewed the footage, resulting in several research papers examining the implications for orca behavior and human safety protocols in areas where the predators were active. Marina contributed extensively to both the documentary and the research, her dual perspective as scientist and survivor providing invaluable insight. By the time she returned to limited field duties 6 months after the attack, walking with a slight but permanent limp, she had become a reluctant authority on orca attack behavior and safety. The documentary, ultimately titled Apex Predators of the Antarctic, premiered at an international wildlife film festival 9 months after the expedition's premature conclusion. The attack sequence, presented with scientific context rather than sensationalism, became the most discussed footage in wildlife documentary circles that year. Marine safety protocols in Antarctic waters were revised based partly on their observations, with new guidelines for boat operations in areas where orcas were present. For Ethan, the project marked a turning point in his career. The professional recognition was gratifying, but more significant was his evolved understanding of his subjects. No longer did he view himself as a detached observer, capturing nature's drama from behind the safety of a lens. The illusion of separation had been shattered, replaced by a more nuanced appreciation of his place within, not apart from, the natural world he documented. A year after the attack, Ethan and Marina returned to Antarctic waters aboard a different research vessel. The purpose was primarily scientific, documenting orca pod behaviors across a broader range with enhanced safety measures, but also served as a form of exposure therapy, particularly for Marina. On their third day at sea, they encountered a pod of Type B orcas hunting crab-eater seals along an ice edge. From the safety of the main vessel, using powerful telephoto lenses and underwater acoustic monitoring, they observed the predators' coordinated hunting techniques. "Different pod," Marina confirmed, after studying the dorsal fin identifications. "No sign of our notched fin female." The relief was palpable among the team, though their safety protocols remained rigorous. No small boats were deployed. Acoustic deterrents remained active, and observers maintained constant watch when the predators were in the vicinity. The orcas hunted successfully for nearly 2 hours before one animal separated from the group, approaching the research vessel with apparent curiosity. It spy-hopped 30 meters from the ship, its massive body vertical in the water as it observed the humans observing it. Marina stood at the rail, her camera capturing each moment of the interaction. Her breathing remained steady, her hands firm on the camera, a victory over the trauma that had once threatened to end her field career. When the orca submerged and rejoined its pod, she lowered her camera with a small, satisfied nod. "Okay?" Ethan asked quietly, standing beside her. "Okay," she confirmed. "They're incredible animals. Predators functioning exactly as evolution designed them, with intelligence we're only beginning to understand." She gestured toward the departing pod. "I can appreciate that now, even knowing what they're capable of. Maybe especially knowing what they're capable of." As they watched the dorsal fins disappear into the Antarctic horizon, Ethan reflected on their journey since that first violent encounter. The physical scars remained. Marina would always walk with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the attack. The psychological impact had evolved rather than disappeared, transforming from acute trauma to a complex respect for the predators that had nearly taken her life. For himself, the experience had fundamentally changed his approach to wildlife filmmaking. The professional distance he had once maintained, the illusion of separation between observer and subject, had been permanently altered. He now worked with a deeper awareness of his vulnerability, his place within rather than apart from the natural world he documented. That awareness brought limitations, certain risks he no longer took, but also a richer understanding of the complex relationships between predator and prey, human and wilderness. As the research vessel continued its journey through the Antarctic waters, the orcas moved on to other hunting grounds, disappearing into the vast southern ocean where they had evolved over millennia into the perfect predators. They carried with them the knowledge, experiences, and adaptations that ensured their survival in one of Earth's most challenging environments, including perhaps the memory of a novel hunting technique tested on an unusual prey species. The encounter had lasted only minutes, but its ripples continued to spread. Through scientific literature, through marine safety protocols, through the lives of those who had experienced it directly. For Ethan, capturing those ripples, documenting not just the dramatic moments but their extended consequences, had become the new focus of his work. And for Marina, understanding them had become integral to her recovery, transforming survivorship into scholarship, personal trauma into professional insight. That evening, as the Antarctic sun hung low on the horizon, casting long golden light across the ice-strewn waters, Ethan filmed Marina at the ship's rail. Her posture told its own story, cautious but present, wounded but resilient. In her expression, he captured something he recognized from his own mirror. The complex negotiation between fear and fascination, between respecting natural danger and continuing to engage with the wilderness that both threatened and inspired them. The footage would never make it into a broadcast documentary. It was too subtle, too personal for commercial programming that favored dramatic action over quiet reflection. But for Ethan, it represented the true story that had emerged from their Antarctic expedition, not just the attack itself, but the long, complicated process of integrating that experience into their understanding of the natural world and their place within it. As darkness finally fell over the Antarctic waters, the ship's lights reflected off the waves where somewhere beneath the surface, the ocean's apex predators continued their ancient cycles of hunting, learning, and adapting. The humans aboard the vessel maintained their vigilance, their respectful distance, wiser now, more aware of the thin boundaries between observer and observed, between studying nature and becoming part of its unending story of survival.